What we're looking at here are the dolls that Drs. Kenneth and Mamie Clark used in their doll studies.
This is Rob J10X, and today we're going to take a look at the 1954 landmark study, Racial Identity and Preference in Negro Children.
The doll tests were a series of studies that Mamie Clark and Kenneth Clark did to try to determine racial awareness in young children.
This study gave a compelling glimpse into the formation of views on race and identity amongst children, from birth through the age of 12, and really introduced an insight as to internally how Negro kids viewed themselves amongst others in America.
They showed young children black and white dolls, and they would ask the children, show me the doll that's nice, give me the doll that's the best, give me the doll that looks like you. And more often than not, the black children showed the doll as the nice doll was the white doll. The doll that was the best was the white doll.
There's three forms of racism, and we are pretty familiar with the first two, which is going to be institutional racism, in the form of socioeconomic issues, policy, redlining would be an example of that. Then you have interpersonal racism, racism that's from person to person, the Ku Klux Klan and police brutality. Those are the two forms of racism that I think we're very familiar with. However, this study introduced the third form of racism, which is the internalized racism. That is the racism that comes when children internalize and accept negative views of self and begin seeing themselves as inferior.
When he got to that last question, give me the doll that looks like you, that's when the children would pause and be a bit more confused or looked troubled, as Dr. Clark would say, because they had said in many cases, this is the bad doll, this is the nice doll. And so, remembering that they had said this is the bad doll, they now had to show the doll that looked like them.
This same internalized racism definitely was alive and well in my childhood. And I was, classic nerd. I lived in a black neighborhood, but I went to, all white school or primarily white schools in the gifted program. And often the labels that, kids from that segment, almost anyone who grew up like that has probably been called a white boy in the neighborhood, right? And the interesting thing about that is, looking back now, I realize that even though it was attempted by bullies to attack you or be a diss or an identity, it was actually inversely a compliment, because to be a kid in a neighborhood and be called white, being called white was associated with doing well in school, not participating in mischievous activities, being well behaved, having good grades. Those were the things that would have a black kid be called white. And if you were highly intelligent and you did well in school, nobody said, look at this Moore over here, man. You think no one ever attached that. No one never said, man, look at this Malcolm X nation. No one ever said that. To excel in those areas was to be called white, right? Well, inversely, the behavior that a white kid would have to engage in to be, accepted as, an ally or blessed in the black culture, well, that could only happen if that white kid was excellent athletically. So if a white kid is really good at football or really good at basketball, then we give him a name, White Chocolate. Man, he's one of us. Or if a white kid, really ingratiated himself in, street behavior, fighting, being a part of the gang, cutting class. Those were the things that would make a white kid be associated with black culture. There was no path for a white kid through intellectual feat or achievement to be associated with blackness. You can't get a nickname in the neighborhood for a white by being good, by being a great student. You don't get a nickname of white chocolate by, being an ally to black initiatives. Their only path to being so affiliated with us was, like I said, through street activity or athletics and sports. However, for us to be labeled as white boys, well, that came from us excelling in school, playing chess, things of that nature. So the internalized racism from the doll test was alive and well in my childhood.
It was particularly difficult for them. And some children, some black children, would do, and some chose the white doll that looked like them because they couldn't embrace. After having said this is bad, not nice, they couldn't embrace it.
So ultimately, the results of the doll experiment in this study is what led to, the Supreme Court and separate but equal case, and ultimately desegregation in schools. Though I feel like this study was very compelling and eye-opening, I think the hypothesis of it was greatly flawed. I don't blame them because they didn't have any other information to go off of. So the thought being that separate but equal is creating, kids that feel this inferiority. So we need to abolish that. And then if we desegregate kids and allow them to experience the schooling, the amenities, et cetera, that white kids experience, then they won't feel inferior. I could see how during that time period that may have been logic, but it was greatly mistaken. What happened, in my opinion, is something even worse, because when black kids were desegregated and brought into white schools, ultimately the programming that came from those schools, particularly when it comes to the history and basically the story of Black Americans, it was a story of inferiority. It was it was programming that constantly reminded black kids of their inferior status, whether in the choice of lessons that were taught in regards to our history, our story, et cetera. So I think, and my personal belief is that the identification, though on a surface level, I think may be different today. I think there's enough black is beautiful and things of that nature to where you probably would see a better result if that was presented to kids as far as in the form of a doll test. But I think a lot of our pride in blackness is only on the surface level. And I think the programming and the negative imagery that's told about us, though it's been broken down, it's a little more complex, it could be gender-based, et cetera, I think it's just as detrimental today as it was then.